I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to pack up their life and put it in a suitcase, staring at the wreckage of a broken marriage. My name is Alex, I'm 38 years old, and I'm a software engineer. I've always been meticulous, the kind of person who double-checks every line of code before running it, leaving nothing to chance. 8 years ago I married Claudia, thinking she was the missing piece to my perfect life. She's wild and unpredictable, a splash of vibrant color in my otherwise gray life. With her sharp wit and fiery red hair, Claudia makes every room she enters seem smaller, simply because of her powerful presence. She used to work as a creative director at a startup advertising agency in the city center, surrounded by a group of equally bohemian art lovers who were addicted to coffee, cigarettes, and the next great idea. Our worlds were different, but for a while it felt like we complemented each other. Her chaos. From the outside, we were the enviable couple. No kids, just the two of us living in a trendy loft in the city. We went to art galleries at the weekend, tried new restaurants, or just hung out. Each in our own little worlds, but still together. Recently, things have been off. There are signs I can't explain, but they keep been on my mind. It all started when Claudia started working longer hours. The occasional night turned into 3 or 4 nights a week. When she came home, there was a sparkle in her eyes. Her wallet was half full of expensive gin, and she vaguely explained that she had had a late brainstorming session or a client meeting that had gone longer than expected. She used to carelessly leave her phone lying around, but now it was always next to her, always face down, always on silent. On weekends, we used to spend lazy Sundays together, but now she always gets up early, saying she needs to go to the gym or have brunch with friends. Watching her leave, I feel an inexplicable tightening in my chest, a sense that something is leaving me. I try to shake it off, telling myself it's just work stress, a natural part of a long-term relationship, but deep down I know something's wrong. One thing stands out more than the rest. One evening, I went to her office to surprise her, having bought takeaway from her favorite Thai shop in the hope of stealing a few moments of peace in her busy working day. When I arrived, it was almost empty, and her assistant, surprised to see me, mentioned that Claudia had left hours earlier. I stood there, holding the takeaway bag, feeling like a fool. When I asked her later, she said she must have forgotten to text me, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she quickly changed the subject. Little things, strange things. When I asked her about her day, she always became nervous or suddenly hummed a song I didn't know. She never shared any of this with me, which made me feel like I was living with a stranger, and every day I would discover new features of this new version of Claudia, and I'm not sure I like it, but I still don't want to believe it's a serious problem. Maybe we just need a holiday to re-establish contact. At least that's what I tell myself. But the truth always catches up with you, no matter how hard you try to bury it. Yesterday afternoon I came home early. Coming home early felt like cheating the universe, stealing a few hours from the hustle and bustle. It was one of the few days when my meetings finished early, and I wanted to surprise Claudia. I imagined her reaction. Perhaps she would smile slyly. Perhaps she would mock me, saying that I had finally learned to relax. When I got out of the elevator, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Our loft was usually full of music or the background noise of Claudia's eclectic TV shows, but at the moment it was deathly quiet. I pushed open the door and immediately sensed that something was wrong. There was an extra pair of shoes by the door, a pair of worn-out, cheap sports shoes that definitely weren't mine. I walked in, deliberately stamping my feet, hoping the sound would announce my arrival, but then I heard a low, urgent voice, not mine, and certainly not Claudia's. The sound sent shivers down my spine and my thoughts raced. I walked down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the photos on the wall, which now looked like mocking relics of happier times. And then I saw them, Claudia in our bed, our fucking bed, with some scrawny guy who looked like he weighed 100 pounds soaking wet, disheveled in the messy way artists are, his hair a mess, tattoos all over, probably meaningless. The type who pretends to know it all but lives in a shoebox apartment and subsists on instant noodles. In Hearst they didn't even notice me. She was too busy gasping for breath. "Oh yes, you're the best," like a cheesy line from a bad movie. My blood boiled, and for a moment I felt nailed to the spot. Anger and disbelief mingled together, making me unable to move. I almost watched it all as an outsider, as if it wasn't real, as if it was someone else's nightmare being played out in front of me. And when they finally noticed me, the person's face was a mixture of panic and embarrassment, like a deer in the headlights. Claudia was staring, wide-eyed, like a child with a hand in a cookie jar. I could see the expression on her face as slowly she realized it was me standing there watching her betray all the promises we'd made to each other. I wanted to rush up and punch him, but instead I felt a strange calmness, a resignation that in some twisted way said I expected this. I stared at her for a long time, then turned and walked out. I didn't hear her call after me. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I remember only the sound of my own heartbeat and the dull thud in my ears as I left. I spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a desperate red, the air thick with the smell of mildew and bad decisions. I sat on the hard edge of the bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, my mind replaying the scene over and over again like some sadistic highlight reel. I didn't fall asleep, I just lay there, every muscle tense, recalling every conversation, every glance, every touch between Claudia and me over the past few months. I kept trying to pinpoint the exact moment things changed, the moment she decided to throw everything away for a stranger, but it was like looking for a drop of water in the ocean, and it didn't help now. I got up at the crack of dawn, stiff and sore, and drove home. The streets were deserted, the city still asleep. I wished I could keep driving until all that was familiar was gone from my sight, but I couldn't escape forever. I had to go back, face the rest of my life. When I walked in the door, Claudia was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. The house was a mess, my clothes scattered on the floor, where I'd thrown them the day before. Empty bottles on the counter, it looked like a battlefield. In a way, it was. When I walked in, she looked up with red eyes. For a moment, I saw the figure of a woman flash before my eyes. The vision of falling in love with the person who listened to my bad jokes, the person who took my hand in crowded places just so I knew she was there. But that vision was quickly replaced by the memory of her tangled in bed with that skinny bastard, and the anger swept over me again. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling, as I started to pack things into a suitcase. I didn't answer at first, just kept moving my hands, faster than my brain could think. Shirt, trousers, shoes, everything flashed through my mind as I started to leave. I finally spoke, my voice surprisingly calm. She stood up, knocking over a chair in her haste, and grabbed hold of my arm with both hands. "Alex, please, don't say anything." I jerked my arm back. "Don't insult me by pretending everything's fine. I saw you, Claudia, I heard you. You can't play the victim here." She looked desperate, her eyes darting around, as if searching for the right words to make everything I saw disappear. "Nothing he said mattered to me," she said, her voice shaking. "It was just a mistake, okay? Alex, let's talk." I stopped packing yesterday and turned to face her. "I came home to find a skinny guy staring at you like you were the last woman on earth. And judging by the way you screamed, 'Oh yes, you were the best,' I thought I should get out of the way and not get in the way of your happiness, so please, bring your lover in." My words left her pale and she stumbled back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Alex, no, you don't mean that. Please, I love you. It was just sex, right?" I retorted. "It was just a stupid, meaningless affair, but this wasn't Claudia. Once you choose this, you choose him, and now I choose to leave too." She fell to her knees, her hands clutching my legs, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Alex, don't go." "I'll do anything. I'll make it up to you." I stared at her, the woman I thought I would spend my life with, now lying on the floor in tears. I felt a wave of sadness, but it was overwhelmed by anger, betrayal, and a determination that had formed overnight. I gently pulled her away from me, took a step back, closed the suitcase zipper, and said goodbye, Claudia, in the silence of the room. I turned and walked out, not looking back. I felt nothing except the weight of the suitcase in my hand and the complete end of my life. I sat in the car for hours, the engine roaring, my mind a blank. I kept waiting for her to come running out, to burst through the door and chase me down the street, but the longer it took, the more I realized that she wasn't coming. Maybe she was too proud. Or maybe she'd finally realized that in either case there was nothing left to say. It was over. I drove aimlessly, the city passing by in a blur of traffic and pedestrians. The phone in the cup holder rang. Claudia's name kept reappearing on the screen. I couldn't bring myself to answer it. The thought of hearing her voice was like hearing nails scratching on a blackboard. I'd had enough. Her lies, her apologies, the endless suspicion and mistrust. Eventually, I found myself pulling up outside the bar I used to go to. Back then, life was simpler. My biggest worry was paying the rent on time. The bar hadn't changed much. The dim lighting, the peeling paint, only half the usual clientele were there, a few regulars drinking and ignoring the world outside. I ordered a double whiskey and sat down, staring at the amber liquid as if it held the answer to my search. My thoughts drifted back to the early days of our relationship, when everything was so new and exciting. Claudia and I met at a party thrown by a mutual friend. Those kind of parties were always chaotic and overcrowded, and you were lucky if you could hear the person next to you talking. She caught my eye, laughing loudly across the room, gesticulating wildly as she told a story that everyone around her was listening to with rapt attention. I was drawn to her like a moth to a flame, attracted by her confidence, vitality, and uninhibited temperament. We hit it off immediately, and the first date turned into a night of partying, strolling through the city, talking about everything and nothing. She made me feel invigorated, an experience I hadn't had in years. She infected me with her energy and made me break through my self-imposed limitations. I thought I had found the perfect partner for me. She balanced my caution with her spontaneity, my logic with her creativity. But then somehow things changed. What I once found charming about her little quirks now began to annoy me. Her spontaneity became reckless. Her creativity felt more like chaos to me, and I was tired of playing the responsible one, constantly reminding her and trying to get us both back on track, while she seemed determined to stay off it. I take another sip of whiskey, the burning sensation in my throat reminding me that I am still here, still alive, still standing despite everything. I look around the bar, expecting to see an acquaintance, someone to listen to me or to distract me from my troubles for a while, but I am alone, just another anonymous face in the dim lighting. I painfully realize that this is my new reality. No more Claudia. No more cozy weekends in our loft. No more jokes between us. No more life we created together. It all came to an end in one afternoon. No matter how much I want to hate her and blame her for everything, I can't help but feel a pang of guilt. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe I should have held on to her tighter. But I let her slip away. But it's too late. Too late for May. Too late for a second chance. The only thing to do is to move on, one step at a time, no matter how painful. The bartender put another drink in front of me, gave me a nod, and I raised my glass, silently toasting my life that had passed. This wasn't the future I had planned, but it was the only future I had. As I finished the drink, I promised myself that no matter how long it took, I would figure out a way to get through this. After that, the days became a blur. I moved into a small apartment near work, more like a temporary residence than a home. The walls were thin, and every night I could hear my neighbors arguing. The sound of the TV and the occasional footsteps were a constant reminder that life goes on. Even if you feel like life is falling apart, life goes on. Chaotic and relentless. I threw myself into work, working overtime and taking on extra projects just to keep myself busy. I've always been good at prioritizing, eliminating distractions, and focusing on the task at hand. But no matter how much I program or stay up late drinking coffee, I can't erase the image of Claudia and that man from my mind. It's burned into my brain and plays a sickening loop every time I close my eyes. I ignored Claudia's phone calls, text messages, and the mountain of emails not because I didn't want to hear what she had to say, but because I couldn't stand her excuses, requests, and half-hearted attempts to put her broken life back together again. I needed space, distance, and time to figure out who I really was without her. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and it wasn't long before I met someone who had been through it all. I was browsing aimlessly through the shelves in the grocery store when I heard a familiar voice calling out to me. It was Sarah, one of Claudia's colleagues from the advertising agency, a tall, dark-haired woman with a bored expression on her face at all times. Small talk was her forte. She came up to me with a look of pity that sent shivers down my spine. "Hey, Alex, I heard about you and Claudia. It must be tough," she said in a voice full of false sympathy. I nodded and kept my mouth shut. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, especially not with people who couldn't wait to hear the gossip. But Sarah wasn't about to let up, and she leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Everyone in the office knows about it," she continued. "Claudia and that guy, what's his name, Greg or something, they've been together for months. I mean, we all think it's an open secret, but I guess it's either Greg or that asshole's name, which sounds just as memorable as he looks." I clenched my teeth and tried to keep a neutral expression, as Sarah rambled on, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She said, "It's a shame, you two seem so well matched, but I guess you never know what's going to happen behind closed doors, right?" Again I nodded, barely listening, my thoughts already far away. Greg, of course, this person must come from her circle, understand her world, which I had never fully understood. I felt a new wave of anger, not just at Claudia, but also at myself, for being so blind and letting things get to this point without realizing. I found an excuse to leave, left the shopping basket behind and walked straight back to my car, sat behind the wheel with my knuckles white. I felt something inside me destroying the carefully constructed wall I had built to control my emotions, crumbling. Finally, I slammed my fist hard against the dashboard. The sharp pain that followed gave me a momentary escape from my chaotic thoughts. I wanted to scream, to smash things, to do anything that would release the pressure inside me. But I just sat there, breathing heavily, staring at the parking lot as the sun set. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. I had been loyal and dutiful, had done everything a husband should do, and it was still not enough. Claudia has abandoned everything for a bum who probably won't even keep his job. I hate her for it, for making me doubt everything about myself. I take out my phone and scroll through Claudia's unread messages. I hover over the latest one, the words blurring in my anger. I hesitate, hovering my thumb over the screen, torn between the desire to finally face her, and I was desperate to finally break up with her once and for all. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I threw my phone aside, started the car and drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I couldn't stay where I was, that I couldn't go on like this. Over the following week, I began to see things in a different light, as if a fog had lifted to reveal the cracks hidden in plain sight. Claudia's departure had been painful, but at the same time it felt like a weight had been lifted from me. I began to realize that I had lost myself in the marriage, how I had tried to adapt to her chaotic world, always trying to keep up with her, always trying to be the best I could be. Now I was free, at least I told myself that every day, and tried to piece together some kind of routine, exercise, work, sleep, repeat. It was tedious and monotonous, but safe and predictable. I longed for it and hated it at the same time. One evening, a colleague persuaded me to go for a drink with him in a bar near the office. It was not a place I usually went to, but I needed a distraction to take my mind off the emptiness at home. The place was full of laughter, and the sound of conversation mingled with the steady rhythm of the music. I sipped my drink while half listening to my colleague's chatter about the new clients we were trying to win over, and then I saw her. She was sitting alone at the bar, wearing a stylish black dress and with dazzling blonde hair. She had a relaxed posture, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She didn't seem to belong there either, among the drunken young men in their 20s, who were trying to look carefree and confident. Our eyes met briefly, and I quickly looked away, feeling a strange emotion that I hadn't felt in a long time. I focused on my drink and tried to rejoin the chatter of my colleagues, but my attention kept drifting back to her. There was something about her quiet, unassuming manner that made me want to know who she was and why she was there all by herself. A few minutes later, she was standing next to me, close enough that I could smell her light perfume, a floral scent with a hint of spice. I looked up in surprise and saw her smiling at me, a playful twinkle in her eyes. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Her voice was calm and confident, as if she already knew the answer. "Of course," I said, pointing to the empty stool next to me. My colleague gave me a curious look, but quickly made an excuse to leave, muttering something about having to make a phone call. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of genuine interest, a long-lost excitement. "I'm Natalie," she said, extending her hand in a firm handshake and a natural smile. "Alex," I replied, a sense of déjà vu welling up inside me, reminding me of the early days with Claudia. Easy conversation, the excitement of meeting someone new. But Natalie was a little different. She captivated me. No history or expectations weighing us down. We talked for hours, the conversation naturally flowing from one subject to the next, to another, and she caught me off guard with her wit, intelligence, and great sense of humor. She worked in finance, hated her job, and was going through a messy breakup. We connected over our shared disillusionment and our mutual contempt for the superficiality of city life. For the first time since my relationship with Claudia had broken down, I felt like I could breathe again. I don't know when the drinks started to blur and the edges of the bar started to fade. Natalie leaned in closer, placed a light hand on my arm, and smiled as she listened to what I had to say. I can't remember the last time I felt so comfortable, so alive. It was intoxicating, and it went beyond the stimulation of the alcohol. The mixture of freedom and temptation was irresistible. Irresistible. And then she kissed me, and I was suddenly surprised when her lips pressed softly but firmly against mine. I hesitated for a second. A fleeting doubt crossed my mind, but then I kissed her back, pulled her closer, and let the moment's impulse drown out everything else. In that stolen moment, I didn't think about Claudia, Greg, or the wreckage of my marriage. I was just a man lost in a passionate kiss, allowing himself to feel something other than pain. When we finally parted, we were out of breath and laughing like teenagers who'd been caught in the act. I knew that no matter what boundaries I drew in my mind, no matter what safety measures I set for myself, there was no going back. Natalie gave me a look that said she understood. That she'd been caught up in the moment just as much as I had. She wanted to get out of there, she whispered, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated, the last shred of conscience and impulse fighting to let myself have this one thing, not to think too much about it. But I was tired of being careful, tired of holding back, so I stood up, nodded, took her hand and was ready to plunge headlong into what was to come. On the way to Natalie's, the neon lights and the blurred city streets were indistinct, and we hardly spoke. The tension between us was thick and charged, a feeling that made every second seem like an eternity. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a mixture of tension and anticipation that made me grip the steering wheel involuntarily. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or if I was just making another mistake that I would regret later. But at that moment, I just knew that I couldn't bear to go back to that empty apartment, where the echoes of a life I no longer wanted to live still lingered. Natalie lived in a stylish, modern high-rise building, a symbol of money and success. When we get into the elevator, she presses her floor's button and leans against the wall, her eyes never leaving mine. There is a powerful emotion in her gaze that both excites and unsettles me. She seems to be able to see through the mask I have always clung to, but there is no judgment there, only mutual understanding, a silent agreement to keep life simple. When the elevator doors opened, she took my hand and led me through the corridor. Her stride was confident, and her apartment was exactly the minimalist style I had been hoping for. Immaculate, with a breathtaking view of the city through the windows. I barely had time to admire it before she pulled me towards her, and her lips kissed mine with an urgency bordering on frenzy. This was not like the hesitant kisses in the bar. This was something else, raw and unfiltered, driven by a need that transcended mere attraction. I responded with equal passion, my hands exploring her body, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric. It was a release, a way to let go of the thoughts in my head, to forget the lingering taste of betrayal, like bitter aftertaste. As we walked towards her bedroom, our clothes fell to the floor on the semi-dangerous path. The room was bathed in a soft city light, casting dancing shadows on the walls through the large windows. We stumbled up to the bed, limbs intertwined and breathless with laughter. For the first time it felt like forever. I let myself go without thinking about the consequences, without worrying about tomorrow. I just let myself get lost in the moment. In the feeling of Natalie's body pressed against mine, we moved together in an urgent way, speaking of unspeakable pain and shared loneliness. We used each other as a means to an end. It was rough and unpolished, two people trying to find solace in each other's arms, if only for a moment. I don't know if it was passion or despair, but at that moment I didn't care. I just wanted to feel something else, something other than the empty pain that had been torturing me for weeks. Afterwards, we lay in the sheets, breathing heavily. The silence between us felt unexpectedly comfortable. Natalie ran her fingers gently over my chest. Her touch was tender, as if she understood that this was not just about sex, but about finding what we had lost. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts a jumble of mixed feelings, a tangle of satisfaction and guilt deep inside me. It doesn't mean anything. Natalie's soft voice broke the silence. Sometimes it's just about feeling alive again. I nodded, grateful for her honesty, for not making a big deal out of it. She was right. It didn't mean anything. It was just a fleeting moment in our lives, a relief from the chaos, and for now that was enough. I stayed for a while, and we chatted in low voices, without any particular topic, just enjoying the comfortable relationship between us. Finally I got dressed, and as I tied my shoelace, The reality of what I had done began to sink in. I felt a little relieved, as if some burden had been lifted. But there was still a nagging sense of unease, reminding me that I could not escape from the problem forever. Natalie walked me to the door, her expression soft but elusive. We exchanged a quick kiss and a simple, reluctant goodbye without promising anything. As I stepped into the hallway, she gave me a smile and a nod, as if to say, "Take care." The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. As it faded away, leaving me alone, I took a deep breath in the cool night air and felt the refreshing sensation on my skin, which made me realize with a sharp sense of reality that although the night had given me a brief escape, reality was still waiting for me. I don't regret what happened with Natalie, and if anything, it's a reminder that I can still feel things other than anger and betrayal. But as I drive back to my apartment, the city lights flash past like the ghosts of a life I'm trying to leave behind. I know the real challenge has only just begun. It's no longer about Claudia, Greg, or even Natalie. It's about me and the long winding road I have to travel in order to rebuild my life from scratch. I woke up the next morning with a dull headache and the taste of aged whiskey on my tongue. What had happened the night before felt like a vague, illusory, distant dream. Lying there staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, the reality of what had happened hit me again. I had crossed the wall of self-imposed restraint I had erected after Claudia's betrayal, and there was no going back now. I tried to put it all behind me and focus on my day of work meetings. But Claudia's messages kept piling up, each one a reminder that I couldn't continue to avoid the inevitable. She was persistent, her words a mixture of regret, anger, and desperation as she tried to reach me. The more I ignored her, the crazier she seemed to get, like a drowning man grasping at anything to keep afloat. It wasn't until I received Claudia's voicemail that I felt my resolve begin to waver. Her voice trembled with pleading, piercing the numbness I had been clinging to. "Alex, please, I know you hate me right now and I deserve it, but I need to talk to you. I need you to understand. It's not just about him, it's about us. Please give me a chance to explain." I played the message twice, trying to analyze every word, every pause, searching for the sincerity in her tone. One part of me wanted to delete it and continue to shut her out, but another part, the part I tried to bury, wanted answers. I needed to know why, to hear her side of the story, even if. But nothing had changed that evening. I finally relented and called her. Before she could answer the phone, her voice came on choked with emotion. "Thank you. I thought you weren't going to call." "Yes, I'm here," I said, my tone flat and distant. "What do you want?" "Claudia." There was a long, awkward silence as she searched for the right words. "I'm sorry." Her voice trembled as she began to speak. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen, but I need you to understand why it did," I said, leaning back in my chair and staring at the ceiling. I heard her take a deep breath before she finally said, "It's not just about Greg. I mean, yes, he's part of it, but it's more than that. I feel lost, Alex. We're drifting apart, and I don't know how to fix it. You're always focused on work, on your day-to-day business, and it feels like we're existing as roommates, not as a couple." Then Greg came along and he made me feel noticed again. He listens, he pays attention, and it makes me feel like you haven't for a long time. My jaw clenched, and a mixture of anger and bitterness welled up in my throat. Is this my fault? Because I wanted to maintain our relationship, while you were fooling around. "No, that's not what I meant," Claudia hastened to say, her voice choking. "I'm not blaming you, Alex. I'm blaming myself for not talking to you properly and not trying to repair our relationship. I've been weak. I've made the wrong choices, but it's not because I don't love you anymore." I let her words replay in my head, trying to reconcile them with the image of her with Greg, and the lies and sneaking around didn't fit with what I'd been telling myself. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the truth was more complicated than I thought. "You know what hurts the most," I said at last, my voice low. "It's not just the cheating. It's that you didn't even give us a chance. You didn't say anything. You didn't try to talk to me. You just went to someone else to fill the gap. And now, after everything that's happened, you think you can just apologize and explain and that'll be enough?" Claudia is silent for a moment, her breathing heavily pressing on the line. "I know I can't make this right, Alex. I know I can't take back what I've done, but I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to forgive me, even if I don't deserve it. I'm asking you to give me a chance to make things right, or at least to let me have closure. I closed my eyes, my heart a tangle of frustration and sadness, forgiveness, closure. These are words that are foreign to me, out of reach. I don't know if I'm capable of giving her what she wants, or if I even want to, but as I sat there listening to her whisper and cry on the other end of the line, I realized that maybe it wasn't just about her. Maybe it was about releasing the anger that was consuming me, about finding a way to move on. Whether that meant forgiving her or not, I don't know. Claudia, I finally let out what was in my heart, and my voice was exhausted. I really don't know. She didn't force me, didn't try to convince me. She just whispered, "Okay," as if she were talking to herself, and as if she were talking to me. When we hung up, there were no promises, no solutions. We were just two people, once intertwined, now falling apart, each trying to figure out what would happen next in a world that was no longer familiar. The days after my phone call with Claudia were the hardest for me. It felt like I was walking through a fog, every step heavy, because I had so many unanswered questions and lingering what-ifs in my mind. I kept going over her words and apologies, trying to sort out the chaotic emotions tangled in my heart, but I could never find an answer. All I had was the pain of betrayal, which, although it had diminished, had never completely disappeared. It was like a scabbed wound, which would ache with every touch. I buried my head in my work, even more so, immersed in the codes, meetings, and familiar numbers and logic. Numbers and logic. The only place that made sense, where problems had solutions and my emotions did not cloud my judgment. But even that started to distract me, to become a way of escaping reality. Day after day, after a long day in the office, I found myself driving to the loft. I had never gone back since that afternoon when I had left with my suitcase. Claudia had left with tears and regret when I left. As I pulled up, I realized I didn't even know why I was there. Maybe I was looking for something, a sign, a sense of finality, or just the sense of finality of seeing the place empty, stripped of everything we had created together. When I tried to push the door open, it wasn't locked, and I walked in, half expecting to see Claudia waiting there. But the attic was quiet and dimly lit. The last rays of the setting sun shone through the windows, and it looked like everything was the same as before, but different. Our things were still scattered everywhere, but there was a sense of emptiness in the air, as if there was a tangible sense of presence in the air. The artwork on the walls, the books on the shelves, and even the half-empty glass of wine on the counter made me feel like this place was a haunted city beset by memories, and those memories no longer belonged to me. I wandered through the space, touching the objects as if to remind myself that they were real and that the life I had lived was not a carefully woven illusion in my bedroom. The bed was neatly made, but I could still see the outline of that moment, the flash of betrayal branded in my memory. I clenched my fists, hoping the image would fade away and stop haunting me, but it stubbornly and mercilessly persisted. I walked over to the wardrobe, opened the door. I found that the clothes were still hanging there, untouched. I began to pack slowly, then faster and faster, because a sense of urgency took hold of me. This wasn't about clothes, but about taking back what was mine and finding my lost self. When I walked out the door, I was surprised by the determination I had shown while packing. Every shirt and every pair of trousers brought me one step closer to freedom. As I packed my bags, my phone buzzed in my pocket. At first, I ignored it, as I was too focused on the task at hand. But when I finished packing, I took out my phone and saw a text message from Claudia. "I'm sorry, Alex. I'm sorry." I stared at the text, the words blurred. There were no more words to say. I quickly replied, "I'm done. Take care of yourself." It felt like the full stop at the end of a chapter, and I could finally close the book. I didn't wait for a reply, and I didn't need one. My bags were packed. I took one last look around the attic, which was now just a place, its walls and roof having lost the meaning I had given them. As I locked the door, I felt a strange calm, like the first deep breath after holding your breath for too long. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city unfolding around me as the headlights and passing strangers intermingled. I thought of Natalie and the short, reckless night we spent together. After that, I didn't speak to her again, and wasn't sure if I would ever speak to her again. She had been a spark in the darkness, a reminder that there was life beyond the pain, but she wasn't the answer. I knew that now the answer had to come from me. Eventually, I pulled up at a quiet spot by the river, overlooking the water. The city skyline was reflected in the dark water like a broken mirror. I sat for a long time, watching the lights flicker and dance, feeling the weight of everything slowly lift off my shoulders. I'm not fixed. I'm not whole, but I'm here, and for the first time in a long time that feels enough, I think. It means something more than just letting go of Claudia, of anger, resentment, endless recriminations that keep me stuck in the past. Letting go is not about forgiveness, not really, but about accepting that some things are broken beyond repair, that some scars will always be there, and choosing to move forward even though the path is not clear. I take a deep breath, and the cool night air fills my lungs. At that moment, I feel a calm determination in my heart. I don't know what the future will bring, and I don't know if I can truly reconcile with the past, but I know one thing: I will never look back and let other people's choices control me again. I start the car, drive away from the river, and merge back into the city traffic. The road stretches out in front of me, wide and full of endless possibilities. For the first time in what seems like an endless time, I am ready to embrace the unknown future.